There's something interesting that I've noticed in the way that I and many other people talk about art, specifically the kind of like fake difference that people perceive between things that are the best versus things that are their favorites. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. So, if you would ask me what's the best song of all time, I would tell you that it's Veritas Quo by Daft Punk. But it's not my favorite song ever. I don't think I really know what my favorite is, but I know that that song is the best song, at least according to me, right? Similarly, if you were to say what's the best game of all time, I would tell you it's Tetris. But if you were to say what's my favorite game of all time, then first of all, the question becomes a lot more complicated for me, right? And also, I probably wouldn't pick Tetris, at least not right now. I say probably my favorite game of all time is Minecraft. That's a bit of a, cop out answer, but still. And like I used to think that there was like a meaningful difference in between those two. Something was the best. Somehow made it more factual. Whereas, something being your favorite, that's just personal opinion. But the thing is, like calling something the best also reveals something about your preferences, right? When I say that Tetris is the best game of all time, what does that say about me? And what like that does say something about me, and what I value in games, which is, mostly gameplay, right? If somebody were to say like The Last of Us is the best game of all time, that probably means that they're probably basing that off of, the story and the graphics, right? They're not really basing it off of its significance, to gaming history. I mean, obviously, The Last of Us was a pretty important game, but like, famously, story-based games aren't exactly the heaviest on gameplay. Like, I guess maybe a better example would be like, a walking simulator, quote unquote, type of game, like Remains of Edith Finch, or that new mixtape game that everyone's talking about, or people talking about. It's one of those things, where the gameplay is not only secondary to the story, the gameplay is barely there. It's almost entirely about the story. I mean, and the visuals. And if somebody would say that that's like one of those is the best game of all time, that's not an objective statement in any way. It still tells you about that person's subjective preferences, right? And so I find it kind of interesting that, like, specifically in my case, and this isn't something I've noticed a lot of other people do. I feel like, yeah, I feel like usually people either accept that what they like is the best, or they don't think that anything is the best, right? But for some reason, I've got this weird like hybrid approach, where the best thing and my favorite thing both say something about my preferences, but one is being presented as though it's objective for some reason, right? Even though that's not only unnecessary, but also just not true, not really possible, right? Because any like rating system or criteria that you would have for that kind of analysis would have to be very personal and subjective. So even if you try to call something the best, the fact that you're calling it the best means that it's a subjective opinion, right? And like you can try to, create some sort of set of standards that isn't at all linked to you. But like if you decide that these are the standards by which art should be judged, then you're laying out certain criteria which inherently have to be linked to you, right? And nowadays somebody might retort to that by saying, well, what if I had, for example, ChatGPT or some sort of AI computer, or if I had, what if I got 100,000 people to pick their own values and then made a rating system based off that, or do the like Metacritic thing or Rotten Tomatoes thing where you compile 100,000 different, a billion different reviews of the same thing, and you average them out and you say, okay, well this has to be objective, right? But that's not objective either, because it's just a bunch of subjectives to it. And not only that, it's less valuable, in a billion times less valuable actually, than a single subjective perspective, right? When you're reading or watching a review of something, right? When you're seeing anybody talk about, their experience with art, they're not only talking about the art, they're talking about themselves, right? They're part of the conversation too. Their personal preferences and experiences are part of it. And so when you watch a review of a movie, for example, you're not only getting information about the movie, you also are getting information about the critic, and that's what ultimately helps inform your opinion or helps you understand what the person's trying to say. And when you get enough of those reviews, eventually they start to dilute each other. You know what I mean? Having two people's perspectives on something makes sense, yeah. But if you're not taking each of those perspectives individually and instead trying to just like turn them into like a giant blob of opinion, you end up making each of them worthless in the end. Like, not only is there no such thing as being objective, or saying or anything being definitively objectively the best or the worst, there's also no value, I feel like, in trying to find one. There's no point in trying to find an objective measurement for the quality of art, because even if you were to find one, it would be completely useless, assuming it was possible to find some sort of objective way to experience and discuss art. It wouldn't mean anything because you're not saying anything at that point. The whole idea of discussing art, reviews and all that kind of stuff is not to just talk about the thing itself. It's to fuse the art itself with your personal experiences and your understanding of it and your own ideas and your own philosophy to make something new. A review isn't an extension of a piece of art. It's not a substitute to it. It's not it's not a companion piece. It's also not an extension of the person that made the review. It's a mixture of both. Damn. Okay, it's and this is especially something that I see that I have a problem with when it comes to major gaming outlets, like IGN, or really just any gaming news source or review that has just like a billion different people, not a billion, like has a bunch of different people doing reviews. It's something that Donkey talks about in his video game critics review. The power of a critic lies in the consistency of their voice, right? The value of watching somebody's criticism of a certain piece of art is that you know where they're coming from, that you understand, their perspective. To give two examples of really controversial recent IGN reviews, there's one they did for Mouse PI for Hire, which is like an old boomer shooter style game, and Mixtape, which, like I said earlier, is kind of much less gameplay focused, more on the story kind of game, right? The problem that I think people have, even if they don't realize it, doesn't have anything to do with the specific scores. It doesn't have anything to do with the specific reviews. It doesn't even have anything to do with the specific reviewers, I feel like. The problem is that both of these reviews are being published by the same outlet. They're not like, person A and person B's reviews of game A and game B. They're IGN's review, IGN, the company's review of these two wildly separate pieces of art made by two wildly separate people. And this kind of compound on itself when, people start to think back to like older IGN reviews that they may have disagreed with. Because they're like, oh, well, you gave this game a 6 and this game a 4 and this game a 10. What are your priorities? And it's like, well, IGN doesn't have any priorities. IGN isn't a person. IGN is a trillion different people who could each have like, you could get two people from IGN to review the same game and get two completely different reviews out of it. Another problem with numbers is the fact that they're numbers, you know what I mean? Like, first of all, and this is more of a personal thing, I guess, but in my opinion, no rating system should have more than 5 points. I don't mean like one star, 2 star, then 2.5 stars or some shit. It's either 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Any more than that, and you're not really saying anything, right? If you have a 10-point rating system, and you give something a 5.5, you have a 20-point rating system at least. But then what? You start going, okay, well then I'm gonna give everything a score out of 20. But then what happens when you give something a 14 out of 5? Now it's a 40-point system, right? And it especially kind of bothers me with the whole 2.5 star thing, because 2.5 out of 5, that's a 5 out of 10. 10-point rating systems are already a thing, and they're already very common. Why do you need to break an already existing one to kind of make that to get your points across, But just to quickly go back to what I was talking about before I started getting angry at numbers. Like I said, I would probably say that Minecraft is my favorite game of all time. But the problem with saying something your favorite of all time is that I think maybe the point in my life where I was most actively playing Minecraft was when I was like 8 years old, or like when I was a kid, basically. Back when I was like the only game that I was ever playing. What I mean by that is that like when I say it's my favorite of all time, it's kind of a dumb thing to say because I'm not the same person that I was. Believe it or not, I'm not 8 years old right now, and I am, at least I like to think, not very similar to the person that I was at 8 years old. And so it's kind of weird for me to take my 8-year-old opinions, and apply them to my current understanding of who I am as a person and what I enjoy. I'm just kind of, is my problem was all kind of objective, or at least attempting to be objective media discussion, because like you can't say that something is like a game is objectively bad no matter how hard you try, right? A lot of people have like specific like obscure games that they absolutely loved as a kid, that at the time they thought were the best game of all time, not only because they were kids and had, pretty much no standards, but because, maybe they hadn't played that many video games at all, and so pretty much everything is going to seem like the best game at that point. But then as you grow older, you realize, oh wait, no, this game's kind of dog shit. Like I've seen a lot of videos of people revisiting games from their childhood that they used to think were like the best, only to be disappointed when they find out they were actually quite bad games, or like not very fun games, And I feel like what that tells me is that even if you try to be objective, even if you try to control for every little variable, you can still not guarantee that nobody's gonna like something. There's probably some kid out there who at one point held Eminem's kart racing closer to their heart than any human being on earth. And if that person says Eminem's kart racing is the greatest game of all time, really, who are we to say otherwise? We don't know Eminem's kart racing like you do. I think that's actually the end of the video. I think that's my last note.